The afternoon bled out in front of the elementary school as the last bus hissed away and the parking lot emptied. Knuckles Hale pushed his mop bucket along the sidewalk, just another aging custodian everyone had learned to look past. He was paid to be invisible, and most days he was. That day, he noticed Maya cross. She stood beneath a cracked oak tree, too small for the fear pressing down on her, fingers locked around her backpack strap until her knuckles faded white. She did not cry. She did not call out. Across the street, a dull gray sedan idled with its engine humming low, the driver sitting still, watching. Knuckles felt it settle in his gut that this was not chance. He had seen the car before. Same place, same time, same patience. Maya glanced up, eyes wide, body frozen, as the sedan rolled forward a few feet. Then, from somewhere down the road, the thunder of a motorcycle echoed closer. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from today. Drop it in the comments, and if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe. Razor Cross carried a reputation that arrived before he did. When his motorcycle rolled into view, conversations lowered, parents pulled their children a little closer, and space opened around him without anyone asking. He was built like a warning sign, broad shoulders wrapped in scarred leather, arms sleeved in ink that told stories most people were too afraid to ask about. Every tattoo marked something earned the hard way, time behind bars, brothers lost on dark stretches of highway, choices that could never be undone. As enforcer and road captain of the Black Covenant Motorcycle Club, Razor was known for decisive violence when lines were crossed. He did not bluff. He did not posture. That was what made him feared. But the truth lived in the small moments no one noticed, how his voice dropped when he spoke to his daughter, how his hands, capable of breaking bone, adjusted her helmet strap with patient care. To Maya, Razor Cross was not danger. He was gravity. Solid, steady, impossible to move. Knuckles. Hale existed at the opposite end of the social spectrum. Where Razor commanded attention without trying, Knuckles was invisible even when standing in plain sight. He was the school custodian, the man who scrubbed floors long after the bell rang and erased the evidence of childhood chaos every night. He moved quietly, shoulders slightly hunched, as if he had learned over time that taking up less space made life easier. Before the school, there had been a factory. Before the factory, a marriage that ended in a hospital room and a silence that never quite lifted. Widowed and aging, Knuckles had learned to live with ghosts. Children, though, saw him differently. They waved. They talked. They trusted him in the simple, unfiltered way only kids can. Knuckles did not have strength left in his body for fights, but he possessed something just as dangerous to evil attention. He noticed patterns. He remembered faces, and when something felt wrong, it stayed with him. Maya Cross was the reason both men would eventually be forced out of their normal worlds. She was small for her age, with a brightness that used to spill out of her in constant motion. She talked with her hands, skipped instead of walked, and carried a faded animal keychain that had lost its color from years of being loved. That brightness was what changed first. It dimmed quietly, the way a light does when a room grows darker without anyone touching the switch. Her smiles came less often. Her steps slowed. She began standing beneath the same oak tree every afternoon, gripping her backpack as if it were an anchor. Fear hollowed her out before she ever found the words to explain it, and that silent fear became the loudest warning sign in the story. The threat watching her never gave a name, never offered a face anyone could describe with confidence. He was simply there. The watcher drove a gray sedan that blended perfectly into the background of ordinary life. No tinted windows, no aggressive moves. Just patience. He arrived at the same time each day and left when the right variables changed. He understood routines the way predators always do. He hid behind legality, behind distance, behind the assumption that evil announces itself loudly. When challenged, he did not panic, he adjusted. He moved farther back. He found cover. That adaptability made him far more dangerous than a reckless criminal. He was the kind of man systems struggled to stop because he lived in the space just before proof. Behind Razor stood the Black Covenant MC, though most people only understood them as a rumor. They were not loud unless they chose to be. Their rides were controlled, almost military in their precision, engines cut when needed. Lines held. No one broke formation without reason. Loyalty inside the club outweighed reputation on the street, and protection always came before profit. They were men who believed brotherhood was not a word, but a responsibility. When one of theirs was threatened, it became a shared burden. When a child was at risk, lines were redrawn without debate. All of this unfolded against the backdrop of a quiet suburban school, bordered by trees that had watched generations of children come and go. It was a place built on routine and trust, where danger was assumed to exist somewhere else. That contrast sharpened everything, the innocence of chalk drawings on sidewalks against the presence of a watching car, the calm order of dismissal against the possibility of violence waiting just beyond the curb. In that space, where people believed nothing truly bad could happen, a biker, a janitor, and a frightened child were being pulled together by a threat no one else was willing to see. Knuckles. Hale had learned the rhythm of the school like a man learns the sound of his own breathing. The final bell spilled children into the afternoon, teachers shouted last reminders, and the world outside the building filled with the familiar chaos of pickup lines and hurried goodbyes. Then, one by one, it all thinned out. The parking lot cleared, the buses rolled away, and the noise faded until only scraps of it remained. Distant laughter, a car door shutting, the squeak of a backpack strap sliding off a shoulder. Knuckles usually liked that part. Quiet meant the day was done. Quiet meant he could return to the small, predictable world where he belonged, mops, wax, and empty hallways that never asked questions. But lately, that quiet had started to feel wrong. It was the kind of quiet that carried weight, like the air before a storm breaks. He spotted Maya cross near the cracked oak tree again. It wasn't that she stood there. Plenty of kids waited for rides. It was how she stood there. Her body always angled slightly away from the street, as if she wanted to disappear into the trunk of that tree. Her backpack strap stayed wrapped tight around her fist, not like a child holding on to something precious, but like someone hanging on so they wouldn't shake apart. Her face was too still, her eyes too alert. Kids were supposed to get bored. They were supposed to complain, fidget, whine about being hungry. Maya did none of that. She waited like she was listening for a sound only she could hear. Across the street, the gray sedan was already there. Knuckles had tried, at first, to talk himself out of what he was seeing. He told himself it was probably a parent, maybe someone waiting for a sibling. Maybe a worker from the construction site down the road taking a break in his car. But then it happened again. And again. Same sedan. Same place, same time. Always facing the school. Always idling. Never getting out. Never waving a child over. Never acting like a normal person waiting for someone they loved. The worst part was the way it made Maya change. She used to skip. She used to smile when she spotted her father's bike at the curb. She used to look like the world was safe. Now she looked like she was trying to survive the minutes until he arrived. And that afternoon, Razor Cross did not arrive on time. At first, it was only a small delay. A couple minutes. Nothing anyone else would have noticed. Parents were still milling around, children were still crossing the sidewalk, and staff were still watching the doors. But Knuckles saw the shift in Maya the moment she realized something was off. She stiffened, her grip tightened. Her shoulders rose, as if she expected a hand to clamp down on them. Knuckles watched her eyes. They were not scanning the street for her father's motorcycle. They were locked on the sedan. That was the moment the last excuse inside Knuckles died, because a child did not stare at a car like that unless the car had already done something to her. Not once, not by accident. Over time, repeated enough to teach fear. The sedan's engine hummed, low and steady. The driver's silhouette was a dark shape behind the windshield, too still to be casual. Knuckles felt his stomach knot. He was standing there with a trash grabber in his hand, wearing a stained work shirt, looking like nothing more than an old man doing his job. But his pulse thudded in his ears like a warning. Minutes stretched. Maya hugged her backpack to her chest now, both arms around it, like it was a shield. Her chin dipped, and she took a half step back toward the tree. Knuckles saw her swallow hard, saw the way her breathing changed. Small, quick pulls of air, like she was trying not to cry. Not because she missed her dad, but because she was counting how long she had been exposed. Then the sedan moved. Not fast, not reckless. Just a slow roll forward, tires creeping along the asphalt as if the driver was testing the distance. The car eased closer to the crosswalk line, close enough that Maya noticed immediately. Her whole body flinched like she'd been struck. Knuckles didn't think. He started walking. He crossed the edge of the lot, keeping his posture casual, eyes down like he was focused on his work. The trash grabber clicked as he picked up a crumpled paper cup. He moved closer to the oak tree, not too fast, not obvious, but enough that he could position himself between Maya and the street if the sedan came any closer. Maya glanced at him, just once. There was no relief in her expression, only a desperate question, like she didn't know if any adult could actually help. Then her gaze snapped back to the car. The sedan stopped again. The engine kept running. The driver stayed inside. Knuckles felt anger rise, sharp and bitter. Not the hot rage of a young man ready to fight, but the cold fury of someone who had lived long enough to know how evil works. It didn't announce itself. It took what it could while everyone was distracted. It waited for moments like this, when the protector was late. A motorcycle finally thundered in the distance. The sound came from down the road, growing louder, tearing through the neighborhood quiet like a blade. Maya's head turned instantly, not toward the street, toward the sound. Hope hit her face for a split second, then fear crushed it again as she realized it was still far away. The sedan rolled forward one more time. Knuckles felt his hands start to tremble. He forced them still. Forced his breathing steady. He was not a hero. He did not have muscle. He did not have a weapon. He had a mop bucket and a spine that ached when the weather changed, but he could not stand there and watch this unfold like it was none of his business. The motorcycle finally appeared. Razor Cross came into view like an oncoming storm, chrome flashing, engine snarling, leather vest dark against the afternoon light. He slowed as he reached the curb, scanning the area automatically, the way men like him always did. He saw Maya under the tree. He saw her posture. And even from a distance, Knuckles could see Razor's body tighten. Maya ran to him, not skipping, not laughing, running like she was escaping something. Razor swung off the bike and caught her with one arm, holding her close. His other hand slid over her hair, gentle, protective, and Knuckles felt the strange sting of emotion in his chest. A man like that, feared by everyone, was still just a father when it came to his kid. Razor murmured something to Maya. She nodded fast, still shaking. Razor's gaze lifted, sharp as a knife, sweeping the street. For a heartbeat, his eyes hit the sedan. The car was still there, still idling, still watching. Knuckles saw something shift in the driver's silhouette, like the figure sank lower behind the wheel, trying to become less visible. It was subtle, but it was the kind of subtle movement that screamed guilt. Knuckles' decision formed in his mind like a door slamming shut. If he went to the school office, they would ask questions and demand proof. If he called the police, they might patrol once, then leave, and the watcher would simply learn to hide better. If he approached Razor directly, he risked saying it wrong, risked sounding like some old man confessing he'd been watching a child. That could end badly in more ways than one, but he could not do nothing. Not after seeing Maya flinch like that. Not after watching the sedan creep forward when Razor was late. Knuckles walked back inside, as if he were going to his usual routine, but his thoughts wouldn't settle. The school smelled of disinfectant and floor wax. The hallway lights buzzed faintly. Everything looked normal, and that made him sick. Evil loved normal. It hid inside it. He found a scrap of paper in his supply closet and a pen that barely worked. His hand hovered over the page. He wrote a few words, then stopped, crumpled it, threw it away. Wrote again. Stopped again. He could almost hear how it would sound if it came out wrong. He could imagine Razor's eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening, the wrong assumption sparking a reaction. Knuckles couldn't stop. Finally, he forced himself to write it plain. Direct. No extra explanation. No rambling. Someone is watching your girl every day. She is scared. He stared at the sentence until it burned into him. Then he folded the paper small enough to disappear in his palm, small enough to be dropped without anyone noticing. His heart hammered like he'd just committed a crime. The next afternoon, he waited. He timed it carefully. He took a trash bag outside and moved slowly near the curb. The sedan was there again. Maya appeared at dismissal, walking toward the oak tree like it had become her assigned post in a war she never asked for. Razor's motorcycle arrived a few minutes later, pulling up with that same heavy presence. Maya ran to him. Razor caught her. Their bodies formed a brief wall between Knuckles and the street. Knuckles stepped closer, pretending to pick up a piece of litter near the bike's kickstand. His fingers released the folded note like it was nothing, just paper dropping with the trash. He didn't look at Razor. He didn't look at Maya. He kept walking, casual, steady, forcing his legs not to rush. Inside the building, he stopped near the glass doors and watched. Razor noticed the paper almost immediately. He crouched, picked it up, unfolded it. His eyes moved across the words. For a second, he didn't react at all. Then Razor's posture changed. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was controlled. His shoulders squared. His jaw tightened. His gaze lifted with slow precision until it landed on the gray sedan. Across the street, the watcher sat perfectly still. And for the first time, Knuckles saw something else in Razor's face besides fatherly softness. He saw a man who had just been given a target. Razor kept one arm around Maya, spoke to her calmly, and then, without rushing, without showing panic, he turned his head slightly and stared at the sedan like he was memorizing it. The sedan didn't move at first. Then, very slowly, the brake lights blinked. Knuckles' breath caught in his throat as the car eased away from the curb and rolled down the street, retreating like a predator that had suddenly realized it was no longer hunting alone. Knuckles stood behind the glass doors, heart racing, knowing he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He had spoken up. He had lit a fuse. And now, whether it ended in rescue or disaster, there was no going back. The next morning, Razor Cross woke with the note still burning behind his eyes. It was a simple sentence, written plain, but it carried the weight of a bullet. Someone is watching your girl every day. She is scared. Razor had read it once, then again, as if different words might appear the second time. They never did. And the worst part was realizing he could match those words to Maya's body language, how she clung to him like she was climbing onto a lifeboat, how her laughter had faded into silence, how she rushed into his arms like the world behind her was trying to swallow her whole. He did not tell her what he knew, not yet. Kids carried fear like a secret sickness, and Razor refused to spread it further. Instead, he changed everything around her without naming the reason. That afternoon, he arrived early. He parked his motorcycle close enough that Maya didn't have to cross open space. He stood by the bike instead of sitting on it, posture loose to the casual eye, but the kind of loose that came from control, not comfort. His gaze moved constantly slow sweeps over faces, cars, windows, the tree line. He didn't stare like an amateur looking for trouble. He watched like a man who had survived trouble long enough to recognize it before it spoke. The gray sedan was there again. It wasn't in the exact same spot. It sat farther down the street, tucked behind another vehicle like it wanted a layer of cover. Razor noticed immediately. His chest tightened, not from surprise but confirmation. Innocent people did not relocate for better angles. Predators did. Maya came out with the other kids and slowed when she reached the sidewalk. Her eyes darted toward the usual place. When she didn't see the sedan there, hope flashed across her face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. Razor saw it too. He hated that her hope depended on whether a stranger was watching her. Then her gaze slid farther down the street, and the hope collapsed. She spotted the sedan anyway. Maya's shoulders rose, her hands clenched, and Razor felt something animal in him bare its teeth. He stepped forward before she could freeze beneath the oak. He offered his hand like it was an ordinary day. "Come on," he said softly. She took it instantly. Razor didn't carry her. He didn't scoop her up like she was helpless. He walked beside her, hand in hers, steady pace, calm face. But every step was a message. There would be no more waiting alone. No more exposed minutes. No more open targets. Behind them, the sedan remained still. Razor could feel it, like eyes on the back of his neck. When he glanced over his shoulder, the driver's shape was there, unmoving, watching. Measuring. Razor held the stare only a second long enough to let the watcher know he had been seen, then turned away and kept walking. He walked Maya home that day, and the day after, and the day after that. Sometimes he left his bike parked and took her on foot. Sometimes he rode her part way, then walked the rest. He varied routes. He shifted timing. He did not allow patterns to form. It was the kind of thing a hunted man did, the kind of discipline Razor had learned a long time ago on roads where the wrong routine got you killed. The watcher adapted. The sedan no longer sat in plain view. It showed up 2 streets over. Then, a different street. Then it started appearing at angles that suggested planning, places with quick exits, places with cover, places where a car could watch without being obvious. Razor began to understand the kind of enemy this was, not a drunk fool acting on impulse, but a patient predator who studied like a professional. And Razor had faced professionals before. He did not lash out. He did not chase the car down and drag the driver through the window. Every instinct in him screamed to do exactly that. But Razor also understood something the world outside the club rarely did. Violence could solve a problem, or it could create 10 more. If he hit the wrong man, he became the villain. If he spooked the right man too early, the watcher could vanish and return later when Razor wasn't there. So Razor studied. He learned the sedan's movements. He tracked where it parked. He paid attention to what days it arrived earlier, what days it stayed later. He noted tiny details, whether the brake lights blinked at the same moments, whether the car turned left or right when it left. He began to treat it like a job. Inside the school, Knuckles Hale watched his own kind of war unfold. He didn't approach Razor. Not directly. Not yet. But he made himself useful in quiet ways. He lingered by the front windows after dismissal, pretending to tidy up. He positioned himself near the doors longer than usual. He watched for the sedan from angles Razor couldn't see while walking Maya home. If he spotted the car shifting positions, he made sure he was outside when Razor returned, close enough to catch Razor's eye and give a small nod in the direction the threat had moved. Razor noticed. The first time, Razor's gaze met his through the glass. No words. Just recognition. Razor understood what that nod meant, and Knuckles understood Razor understood. That was how their alliance formed. 2 men from different worlds connected by the same instinct: protect the kid. It wasn't friendship. Not yet. It was trust built in silence. Over the next week, Razor started arriving a few minutes early and standing where Knuckles could see him. Knuckles started making sure he was nearby at dismissal, always with some reason that looked harmless. A broom. A trash bag. A bucket. To anyone else, it was just the custodian working. To Razor, it was another set of eyes. And Maya began to change too. Not back to normal, not fully, but small cracks appeared in the fear. Her grip on her backpack loosened a little when she saw Razor waiting. Her steps got lighter when she realized she wasn't going to be abandoned beneath the oak tree anymore. She still glanced at the street, still watched for the sedan, but she didn't look like prey standing alone. She looked like a kid, walking beside the strongest wall she knew. That shift mattered. Predators fed on isolation. Razor made sure Maya was never isolated again. Still, the watcher didn't leave. One afternoon, Razor noticed something that turned his blood cold. The sedan wasn't just farther away, it was positioned behind a hedge line where the driver could see the school entrance without being seen easily from the sidewalk. That meant the watcher was learning. Adjusting to Razor's presence, waiting for the one day Razor slipped. Razor didn't blink, he didn't show reaction. But inside, something hardened. That night, he sat at his kitchen table long after Maya had gone to sleep. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He replayed every sighting, every movement, every angle. He thought about calling the police. Then he imagined the questions. Do you have proof he threatened her? Did he speak to her? Did he touch her? Did he commit a crime? Razor's jaw clenched so tight it ached. A man could stalk a child for weeks and still live inside the word legal until the moment he made his move. Razor understood the system's limits. He also understood his own limits. If he went to the authorities too soon, they might scare the watcher off, and that would sound like success. But success wasn't the watcher leaving the school. Success was the watcher being stopped, so he couldn't circle another child somewhere else. The club was another option. One call, and Razor could have brothers on every corner, watching every street, ready to act. The Black Covenant could create a presence that would make the whole neighborhood feel like it had teeth. But that came with risk, too. Too much heat. Too much attention. Too many ways for the wrong person to misunderstand what was happening. Razor wasn't afraid of conflict. He was afraid of Maya getting caught in the blast radius, so he chose restraint, for now. He doubled his vigilance. He tightened Maya's routines. He stayed calm on the outside, even when his blood ran hot underneath. He made his presence steady and predictable to Maya, even as he made their routes unpredictable to the watcher. But the longer it went on, the quieter the threat became. The sedan stopped idling in obvious places. It started appearing only in glimpses, at the far end of a street, turning a corner, parked with a view of the school from a distance that felt safe for the driver. It was like the watcher had turned the stalking into a game of patience, a contest of who would blink first. And Razor knew something the watcher didn't. Razor had lived through long waits. Razor had endured worse than patience. Razor could outlast anyone. Still, the danger was changing shape, growing more careful, more intelligent, and that made it worse. Because when evil went quiet, it wasn't retreating. It was preparing. The problem with fighting a patient predator was that patience could be used against you. Razorcross understood that too well. He had made routines unpredictable, changed routes, arrived early, stayed late, watched corners, memorized the gray sedan's habits like a man studying a disease. And still, the watcher stayed close, quieter now, smarter, hiding behind distance and shrubs and parked cars like a coward who had learned how to survive. For nearly 2 weeks, Razor didn't slip. Then, life slipped for him. It started with a call in the middle of the day, the kind of call that dragged a man out of his plans whether he wanted it to or not. A brother from the Black Covenant had gone down on the highway, nothing fatal, but bad enough to need help. Razor had promised he'd handle it fast. 10 minutes. 15 at most. He would be back long before dismissal. He told himself that because he had to believe it, because believing anything else meant accepting he was about to gamble with his daughter's safety. He moved as fast as he could, but highways didn't care about promises, and accidents didn't follow schedules. A tow truck took longer than it should have. The injured brother was stubborn, arguing through pain like a man who didn't want to admit he needed help. Razor kept checking the time, jaw tight, voice clipped. He finally left the scene with the taste of panic rising in his throat, the engine of his bike roaring like it could outrun consequence. When he reached the school, the lot was already thinning. His heart dropped when he didn't see Maya by the curb. Then he spotted her under the oak tree. Alone. The sight hit him like a fist. She stood in the same place she used to, shoulders drawn tight, backpack hugged against her chest like armor. The hope she'd started to regain over the last week was gone again, erased in minutes. Her eyes weren't scanning the sidewalk. They were fixed on the street. Razor followed her gaze. The gray sedan sat farther down than usual, angled just right. And it was moving. Slowly, deliberately, it crept forward as if the driver had been waiting for this exact moment. Like he'd been learning Razor's patterns and knew the one weakness every protector had: he couldn't be everywhere at once. Razor's body went cold. He didn't gun the engine. He didn't roar up in a reckless charge that would spook the watcher into disappearing again. Razor needed the car close enough that he could confirm, really confirm. This wasn't a paranoid father seeing ghosts. He needed proof. He needed the license plate. He needed something that could be handed to a cop without getting laughed out of the room. He rolled forward with control, bike gliding like a predator of its own. His eyes stayed on the sedan, watching for a sudden turn, a sudden escape. The sedan stopped, just short of the oak tree's line of sight. Maya flinched hard, her knees bending slightly, like she was ready to run but didn't know where to run. Razor felt something savage surge in him, but he swallowed it down. Violence was easy. Violence was what everyone expected from a man in leather and ink. But this wasn't about what the world expected. This was about ending the threat, not feeding it a reason to evolve. He pulled up to the curb and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt wrong, like a held breath. "Maya," he said, voice steady, as if his heartbeat wasn't trying to punch out of his ribs. She turned toward him and ran, fast, desperate, almost stumbling. Razor caught her, lifted her slightly, and set her behind him so his body blocked her view of the sedan. His hand stayed on her shoulder, firm and reassuring. "It's okay," he told her. "I'm here." But his eyes never left the car. The watcher didn't drive away. That was new. That was bolder than before. The sedan idled, engine humming. And Razor realized the man inside had grown confident. Confidence came from repetition, from success, from the belief that even if he didn't strike today, he could strike tomorrow. That kind of confidence only formed when a predator had done this before. Razor reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out his phone without making a show of it. He angled it just enough to zoom in on the rear of the sedan. He snapped a photo. Then another. Then he focused on the plate and took one more, hands steady despite the rage crawling under his skin. He memorized the letters and numbers anyway, forcing them into his mind like a prayer. The sedan finally moved. Slow retreat, not a panicked flee. The driver backed off down the street and turned the corner like nothing had happened. Razor's jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. He crouched slightly to Maya's level, forced softness into his voice. "You're riding home with me today." Maya nodded quickly, eyes shiny but not crying. She'd learned crying didn't scare predators away. As they left, Razor scanned the sidewalk and saw Knuckles Hale behind the glass doors, face pale, hands gripping the handle of his mop like he wished it were a weapon. Their eyes met, and Razor gave the smallest nod. Confirmation, gratitude, and warning all at once. Knuckles nodded back, and Razor could see the guilt sitting heavy on the old man's face, as if he blamed himself for Razor being late. Razor didn't blame him. Razor blamed himself. That night, Razor did what he had resisted doing. He went to the authorities. He hated the station, hated the fluorescent lights and the bored expressions and the way men behind desks looked at him like he was the problem just because he walked in wearing leather. He kept his voice calm, measured, the way a man did when he was trying not to scare the very system he needed to use. He explained the pattern. The car. The way it showed up daily. The way it moved closer when he was late. He told them his daughter was afraid. He showed the photos. The officer's expression barely changed. "Has he approached her?" the officer asked. "No," Razor said, forcing patience. "Has he spoken to her?" "No." "Has he touched her, tried to grab her?" "Made threats?" Razor's eyes narrowed. "Not yet." The officer leaned back slightly, as if that single phrase settled it. "Then we don't have much to go on. He's not committing a crime by sitting in a car on a public street." Razor felt heat flare in his chest. He kept it down, because anger would only turn him into what they already believed he was. "So you're telling me I have to wait until he does something?" Razor asked, voice tight. "I'm telling you we can increase patrols near the school for a few days," the officer said, tone practiced. "But if he's just watching, there's not much we can do." Razor left the station with a kind of rage that didn't scream. It sharpened. Outside, night air hit his face, and with it came a memory he hadn't visited in years. A different street. A different time. A different child. Razor had been younger then, still learning what the club truly meant, still thinking strength was all muscle and intimidation. He remembered being a kid himself, growing up around men who didn't protect because they assumed someone else would. He remembered a friend from the neighborhood, a little girl who used to ride her bike past the same corner store every afternoon. People noticed a man watching her once or twice. They shrugged it off. They said it wasn't their business. Then she disappeared. They found her later, and the world never fit right after that. Razor had carried that story like a scar, even when he didn't speak it aloud. It was part of why he believed protection wasn't something you waited to receive. It was something you earned through action, something you did with your own hands if the system failed. And now the system was failing again. The pressure began to close in from all sides. Razor's brothers noticed the tension in him. They noticed the way he arrived at the clubhouse with his eyes scanning the lot, the way his patience had thinned, the way his fist clenched when his phone buzzed. Men in the Black Covenant didn't miss signs like that. They read each other like road maps. One of them, a heavy-set man with a scar down his cheek, asked Razor what was eating him. Razor almost told him. The words were right there. All he had to do was say it, and the club would move. They'd come like a storm. They'd set up watches. They'd put bikes on every street. They'd make the neighborhood feel the weight of brotherhood and consequence. But Razor pictured Maya standing in the middle of all that attention. He pictured parents filming with their phones, news crews sniffing around, the school board panicking. He pictured the watcher disappearing again, slipping away in the chaos, only to show up somewhere else where no biker father was watching. He kept his mouth shut another day. But the ticking clock didn't care about Razor's caution. The next afternoon, Razor was forced into another delay, smaller, stupid, unavoidable. A stalled car blocking the road, a detour. A red light that refused to change. Every second felt like a blade against his ribs. When he finally turned onto the school street, he saw it again. Maya under the oak tree. And, farther down, the sedan closer than it had ever been. This time, the car didn't creep. It rolled forward with intent. Maya froze completely, like fear had pinned her to the earth. And from somewhere behind, Razor fainted first, then louder. A different sound began to rise. Engines. More than one. The low thunder of motorcycles building in the distance, gathering like a storm front. Razor's throat tightened as he realized what was happening. Whether he had called them or not, the Brotherhood had been watching him. They had felt the danger in him, and now they were moving. Maya stood alone again, and the world was about to change because the Black Covenant did not tolerate predators circling children, not on their road, not in their town. The sound hit the street before the bikes did. It started as a low vibration, a distant tremor that made loose leaves quiver along the curb. Then it grew into a steady, rolling thunder, the kind that pressed into the chest and made every head turn. Parents paused mid-step. A teacher at the door stiffened. Even the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as the roar climbed closer, multiplying into something bigger than one engine. Razor Cross eased his motorcycle toward the curb, but he didn't cut the engine yet. His eyes stayed locked on the gray sedan. The watcher had pushed closer this time, too close. The car sat angled like it was ready to bolt, but it had also inched forward enough that Maya could see it clearly, enough that the driver could let her know he wasn't afraid. Maya stood under the oak tree, frozen so hard she looked carved from fear. Her backpack was clutched to her chest like armor, but armor didn't help against something that waited. Her eyes flicked toward Razor, then back to the sedan, as if she was trapped between two worlds, one where her father existed, and one where he might not get there in time. Razor killed his engine. The sudden silence around him felt sharp, but the distant rumble kept rising, getting louder with every heartbeat. Razor stepped off the bike and walked straight to Maya. He didn't rush. He didn't show panic. He moved with the kind of calm that came from understanding that fear was contagious, and his daughter couldn't afford to catch it. He reached her and placed one hand on the back of her head, guiding her gently against his side. She leaned into him instantly, shaking. "It's okay," he murmured, voice low. "You're safe." But he didn't look away from the sedan. Across the street, the watcher sat in the driver's seat like a shadow behind glass. The car idled with the steady confidence of a man who believed he could always escape consequence. He had no reason to think otherwise. He was just another vehicle on a public street. He was just another face behind a windshield. The world was full of excuses for men like him. Then the first bikes came into view. They rolled in from the far end of the road in disciplined formation, 2 by 2, engines synced, spacing precise. Chrome caught the afternoon light and turned it into cold flashes. Leather vests moved like dark flags. Patches were visible even from a distance, stitched with a name that carried weight, Black Covenant. The entire street changed as they arrived. Parents backed up instinctively. Some grabbed their children. A few stared like they were watching a storm approach. No one spoke. No one laughed anymore. The air itself seemed to tighten, thick with something primal, the understanding that power had entered the space. The Black Covenant did not roar into chaos. They came in quiet control. They fanned out with purpose. One pair pulled up near the school entrance, blocking the most direct path out. Another pair slid farther down the street, cutting off the easy escape routes. Two more rolled to the opposite curb in a slow arc, positioning themselves like sentries. The engines stayed running low, heavy, steady, like a warning drum. In the center of it all, Razor stood with his daughter under the oak tree. He didn't wave them in. He didn't bark orders. He didn't need to. Brotherhood like that moved without being told. They read his posture. They saw his hand on his daughter's head. They saw where his gaze went. Every set of eyes shifted to the sedan. The watcher's car was suddenly the only thing that looked out of place. At first, the sedan didn't move. The driver seemed to freeze, as if his brain was trying to process what he was seeing. A whole club, a whole wall of men who carried reputation like armor, and they weren't shouting. They weren't threatening. They weren't even approaching him. They were simply present. That presence was its own kind of violence, because it said something clear without words. You are seen, you are surrounded, and you are not in control anymore. Razor felt Maya tremble against him. He took a breath, then turned slightly and guided her towards something that had arrived with the formation, a motorcycle with a sidecar. The sidecar looked almost absurd in that lineup of hard machines and hard men, but it wasn't there for decoration. It was there for one reason only, Maya. Razor crouched down beside her, forced his face soft, and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Look at me," he said. Maya's eyes lifted, wet with fear. "You're not alone," Razor told her. "Not now. Not ever. You understand me?" She nodded quickly, lips trembling. Razor opened the sidecar door and helped her climb in. His hands were steady, gentle, practiced. He strapped her in with care, checking the buckle twice. He adjusted her backpack so it sat at her feet instead of blocking her. He brushed her hair off her cheek like he had done when she was smaller and scraped her knee. All around them, the club held position. No threats, no yelling, no dramatic gestures, just engines idling and eyes watching. When Razor stood back up, he didn't step toward the sedan. He simply planted his boots on the pavement beside the sidecar and folded his arms loosely across his chest. His stance was relaxed enough to look casual, but anyone who understood men like him could read what it really was. He was holding ground. The watcher finally reacted. The sedan's brake lights blinked once, then stayed red, glowing like a warning. The front wheels turned slightly, then straightened, as if the driver wasn't sure which direction offered escape. The engine revved just a touch. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to show nerves were leaking through his control. One of the bikers, an older man with gray in his beard, lifted a hand and pointed calmly at the sedan's rear plate. Another biker, younger, quicker, pulled his phone out and raised it, camera lens catching the numbers clean and clear. The watcher saw it. Razor watched the driver's silhouette shift, shoulders tightening. The man had lived off anonymity. Plates, photos, witnesses, those things were poison to men like him, and now the poison was spreading fast. The sedan lurched forward, not a full sprint. Not yet. It rolled, testing whether the bikers would rush him, whether they would give him an excuse to claim he was threatened, whether they would make it messy enough for him to slip free unseen. But the club did not move. They held. They watched. They let him feel the net closing without ever touching him. That was the brilliance of it. Razor understood it in real time. They weren't there to feed him a story. They were there to take away his ability to hide behind one. The sedan hesitated again, caught between the instinct to flee and the fear of making the wrong move in a street full of men who looked like consequences. Maya's breathing came quick from inside the sidecar. Razor heard it, and something in him tightened, but he kept his face calm. He did not want his daughter to remember this as chaos. He wanted her to remember it as protection. The watcher made his choice. The sedan's engine roared higher, and the car surged forward, turning hard at the first opening it found. Tires chirped against pavement. It shot down the street, cutting around the edge of the formation like a rat slipping through a narrow gap. Still, the bikers did not chase. They didn't need to, because the plate was already captured. The photos were already taken. The witnesses were already watching. The watcher could flee the street, but he couldn't flee what he'd left behind. The sedan disappeared around the corner, and for a moment the only sound left was the idling of motorcycles and the distant echo of the car's retreat. Then the street exhaled. Parents started moving again, slow and uneasy. Teachers whispered to each other near the doors. The world returned to motion, but it had been changed. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had felt the shift. Razor turned toward the sidecar and crouched again. Maya stared up at him, eyes wide. "He's gone," Razor said softly. "You did good." Maya's lips parted, and for the first time in days, her voice came out in something close to normal. "Is he coming back?" Razor's throat tightened. He looked at her, then at the line of brothers holding their bikes like a wall behind him. "No," Razor said, and the word carried more promise than comfort. "Not here. Not to you." He stood and looked across the street where the sedan had been. That empty space felt like a victory, but Razor knew better than to mistake absence for justice. Justice was what came next. The part that happened in courtrooms and police reports and fingerprints, the part the system always claimed it needed before it acted. But now they had what the system demanded. Proof. And more than that, Maya had something she hadn't had in weeks. The fear had been challenged. The predator had been forced to retreat. The world had shifted back under her feet, and she could feel it. The Black Covenant MC remained in place another long minute, engines still humming, as if daring the watcher to return. Then, one by one, they shut their bikes off, the silence falling heavy and final. Razor looked at his brothers and gave a single nod. They nodded back. No speeches. No congratulations. Just the unspoken understanding that brotherhood had done what brotherhood was meant to do. When Razor climbed onto his bike and the sidecar rider eased forward, Maya sat strapped in, staring straight ahead instead of shrinking down. Her shoulders were still tense, but she wasn't frozen anymore. Power had shifted. The watcher had learned what predators hated most. He wasn't invisible. And fear, for the first time since this began, had started to break. The gray sedan never returned to the school. The first afternoon after the confrontation, Razor arrived early out of habit, tension still riding his shoulders like armor he couldn't yet take off. He scanned the street the way he always did now, eyes moving from curb to corner to the far end of the block. The space where the car used to idle was empty. No replacement vehicle. No distant silhouette. Just normal traffic flowing past like it always had before. Fear learned Maya's name. Maya came out of the school slowly at first, cautious, her eyes doing their own quiet search. Razor watched her face as she looked toward the street, expecting to see the shape that had haunted her. When she didn't, her steps slowed, then stopped. She looked again, squinting, as if the absence itself was suspicious. Then something softened in her expression. It wasn't sudden joy. It was relief, settling in carefully, like she didn't trust it yet. Razor held his breath as she walked toward him. Halfway there, she skipped. It was small, barely a hop, but it landed in Razor's chest like a blow. She hadn't skipped in weeks. When she reached him, she smiled, not wide, not careless, but real. Razor knelt and hugged her, eyes burning as he hid his face against her hair. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. That moment was proof enough that something had been broken loose. Inside the building, Hale watched through the glass doors, his hands resting on his mop handle like an old soldier leaning on a rifle long after the war had ended. He saw Maya smile. He saw Razor's shoulders finally drop a fraction. And only then did he allow himself to breathe. Razor didn't thank Knuckles right away. Not with words. He simply met his eyes through the glass and gave him a slow nod, deep, deliberate, full of meaning. Knuckles nodded back, throat tight. He had never wanted recognition. He had only wanted the fear to stop. Seeing Maya walk away light again was more than enough. Days passed. Then, more days. The sedan never appeared. Razor still stayed vigilant, but the edge dulled. The constant readiness eased into something manageable. Maya laughed again. She talked about school. She complained about homework. She became a child instead of a target. And then the call came. Razor answered it in his kitchen late one evening, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The voice on the other end belonged to a detective from a neighboring town. Calm, professional, careful with words. They had picked up a man near another elementary school. Same gray sedan, Same behavior. Different location. A patrol unit had run the plate, Razor's Club captured. It flagged. When they pulled the driver over, they found more than suspicion. They found evidence that finally tipped the scale from watching to chargeable intent. Razor closed his eyes as he listened. The detective said the man would not be circling schools for a long time. He said Razor's report and the plate information had mattered. He said it had likely stopped something worse. When Razor hung up, he sat in silence for a long time. He thought about the girl from his childhood who had never been protected. He thought about how close Maya had come to being another name whispered too late. He felt relief, yes, but also something heavier. Gratitude. The next afternoon, Razor found Knuckles alone near the supply closet, wiping down a cart. Razor approached quietly, boots heavy on the floor. Knuckles looked up, startled, then stiffened when he recognized him. "They caught him," Razor said simply. Knuckles blinked. "They did?" Razor nodded. "Near another school. Because of the plate." Knuckles swallowed hard, his hands tightening on the rag. For a moment, he looked like he might fold in on himself, like the weight of what could have happened was finally crashing down now that it was over. Razor stepped closer and placed a hand on Knuckles' shoulder. Not hard, not threatening. Solid. "You didn't just help my kid," Razor said. "You helped kids you'll never meet." Knuckles' eyes filled, and he looked away quickly, embarrassed by the emotion. "I just noticed," he said quietly. "That's all." Razor shook his head. "Most people notice. They just don't act." That was the end of the conversation. No speeches. No praise. Razor didn't need Knuckles to carry gratitude like a burden. He had already done enough. The Black Covenant changed, too. The confrontation had stayed with the club, not as a boast, not as a story to tell at bars, but as a reminder. They began showing up at schools in small numbers, quietly, without patches visible. Walking routes. Standing near crossings. Escorting kids whose parents worked late or worried too much. They called it Covenant Watch, and it wasn't about control or reputation. It was about presence. About making predators uncomfortable enough to move on before harm could take root. Razor oversaw it without dominating it. He let other brothers lead. He learned something in the process. Strength wasn't always being the first to act or the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it was trusting others to stand the line with you. As for Razor himself, the anger didn't vanish. Men like him never lost it entirely. But it changed shape. It stopped boiling over at every shadow. It settled into something colder, steadier, guided by patience instead of impulse. One evening, as he walked Maya home beneath the oak tree that no longer felt like a trap, she slipped her hand into his and squeezed. "You didn't leave me," she said. Razor swallowed and squeezed back. Never. He meant it more deeply now than he ever had before. Because he had learned something that surprised him. Protection wasn't just about being strong enough to fight. It was about being grateful enough to listen, and humble enough to accept help when it mattered most. Evil did not arrive with sirens or raised voices in this story. It arrived quietly, wrapped in routine, counting on the world to stay distracted. It survived for as long as it did because people assumed someone else was watching, someone else would step in, someone else would notice when something felt wrong. That is how predators move through ordinary places, by relying on silence and hesitation. The moment that silence was broken, the balance shifted. One man chose to see. Another chose to act. And a child was spared because of it. The lasting truth is simple and uncomfortable. Protection has nothing to do with how someone looks. Leather and tattoos did not make Razor a protector. A mop and a quiet job did not make Knuckles weak. What mattered was the willingness to stand between danger and the innocent, even when it was frightening, even when it was inconvenient. Brotherhood was not found in patches or engines alone, but in shared responsibility. Honor was shown through restraint, not rage. Redemption came not from violence, but from choosing compassion over fear. The strongest people are not always the loudest or the most feared. Often, they are the ones who notice what others ignore and step forward without applause. When people stop looking away, Evil loses its cover, and even the quietest courage can change everything. Stories like this remind us that the real heroes don't always look the part. They don't wear capes, and they don't ask to be seen. Most of the time, they're the ones standing quietly in the background until the moment comes when someone needs them to step forward. Take a second and think about it. If you were tested, who would you protect, and would you notice the warning signs before it was too late? If this story hit you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and whether you believe brotherhood still matters in today's world. Because sometimes, one man who notices can change everything.